Spain's recent snap election was a risky move for Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. The result was inconclusive. Many think a new poll is now just a matter of time. The vote was called to try and prevent a right-wing government taking power. Did it work? And has Spain's political gambler Sanchez pulled off another masterstroke? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, Pedro Sanchez has taken risks all his political life, but calling a snap general election when he was trailing in the polls looked like one too far. On pure numbers, he did lose the election, but the chance of a governing right-wing coalition looks unlikely, meaning another election is looming. And many believe Sanchez might well retain his position this time round.
Pedro Sanchez called the snap election after poor local election results. He fought the campaign on trying to convince the Spanish people a lurch to the right was unpalatable. And while right-wing parties won the most seats, the coalition between the People's Party and Vox still doesn't take them close enough to conjure up a working majority together. And a diminishing Vox vote means any new election is likely to push them further back. That would leave the door open to Sanchez forming a new coalition, especially if he can offer more concessions to Catalan and Basque independence campaigners, something that angered the right in the first place.
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining us here in London is Dr. Pablo Calderón Martínez, who's an associate professor in politics and international relations at Northeastern University in London. In Madrid, we have Fernando Vallespín, Professor of Political Science at the Autonomous University of Madrid and a columnist at the newspaper El PAÍS. And in Zaragoza, in Spain, Alejandro Quiroga, a reader in Spanish history at Newcastle University. Fernando, I'll come to you first of all. Pedro Sanchez, he is a born political survivor and a gambler, isn't he?
Well, I would say he's a pretty smart politician who has perfectly understood what to do in each situation. So he adapts very well to the different circumstances. And we have to consider that he had to lead a government that was based on two parties, a traditional Spanish party, which was the Socialist Party, and a new one, Podemos, who was quite a radical leftist party, right? And with certain, I don't know, with a certain touch of wokeness, as we would say today. And so it wasn't easy since the beginning. And this was the first coalition government to be held in Spain at a national level. I think that's important to know because there was no prior experience of coalition governments in our country, right? And then on the other hand, it was, even though it was a coalition government, it was a minority government. So in order to put forth legislation, they had to rely on quite an unstable coalition of other parties, mainly consisting of Basque or Catalan nationalists. And some of them, of course, independentists or separatists. So in that sense, I mean, it wasn't easy at all, but he could manage it. I mean, he practically consumed all the legislature, So if it weren't for this snap election, I think he would have survived until December.
Alejandro, Sanchez came second, but really this must have felt like a win, surely.
In many respects, I would imagine it did, because every single opinion poll was saying that he wouldn't be able to form a government after the elections, and now he's in a position, a very unstable position if you want, but he's in a position to form a government. So in some respects, it must have, it felt like a victory, yeah.
Pablo, can I ask you, why did he take that gamble? I mean, those election results in May were very poor by his standards. and he called a snap election.
Well, I think I agree with what Fernando was saying before, and I think you're only a gambler when you lose, right? And as long as you keep winning and it keeps working out for you, then you're not a gambler, you're a canny political operator. And so far, I think he's proving himself to be very good at politics and at reading politics and at reading the feel of the Spanish population. So I thought his calculation was, after the results in the local elections, okay, I'm going to call your bluff, if you wish, to the Spanish public and said, if you really want a right-wing coalition with a far-right party in government, you have to demonstrate it in the polls, you have to come out and show up. And I think he was also betting on the fact that once that became a real possibility, the left-wing vote would come out and vote and would save him from that particular outcome, which is exactly what ended up happening. So again, it was a calculated gamble, but one that it seems to keep working for him. And I think that's because they're all very well thought out gambles. He fancies himself as a little bit of a comeback kid in some way. And he's very good at sort of fielding those positions and at being the underdog, basically.
So you think he made a calculation, he saw the risk, and he went for it?
Yes, I think it was pretty much a calculation. I think they expected the left to mobilize a lot more once the spectrum of the far right being part of government, right? And I think he calculated that the right wasn't going to mobilize quite as much as the voters because they reached sort of the limits of their capacity to a certain extent. And that is really what happened, right? I mean, it could have gone horribly wrong for any number of reasons. The campaign could have gone wrong. It's true as well that the Partido Popular did a terrible campaign. They didn't run a particularly effective campaign. So any of those things could have gone wrong and we'd be having a different conversation. But the fact is it didn't go wrong for him, and we are where we are.
Well, let's talk about the PP. Fernando, I want to get your take on the opposition leader, Alberto Feijóo. I mean, he had a very poor campaign, didn't he?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, he didn't start too bad. You know, he held a debate alone against Pedro Sanchez, and practically everyone agreed that Feijóo had won that debate. But afterwards, he disappeared. He didn't want to participate in any other debate with other political forces, and I think that was a mistake. But his main mistake really was that he didn't know how to handle the relationship of the Partido Popular, so the Spanish conservatives, with Vox, you know, the ultra-right in Spain. So in that sense, you know, the fact that before the general elections we had local and regional elections, and that several coalition governments were built in some regions and in most of the most important cities of Spain, and Vox entered into those governments, I think that was surely a mistake. Well, of course, having a majority implied that you would have to, I mean, if you wanted to govern, you would have to put them in, right? But there wasn't a rationale behind it. I mean, so people didn't really understand what was going on. And I think Vox then introduced a discourse which was absolutely radical, that somehow separated Vox from the PP, and they didn't know how to overcome that contradiction, right? Because, and in a way, Feijóo was always presented as a moderate politician. He had won, with absolute majority, had won 4 elections in his home region in Galicia, which is one of the Spanish historical regions with their own language, which is close to Portuguese. And so in that sense, had a lot of political experience. So we don't really know why he thought, I mean, it would matter in the end that his handling with Vox could put him in jeopardy, or could put the majority of the right in jeopardy. So in that sense, I think it was, to me, it was certainly a disappointment. You have to consider one thing, which is important in order to understand Spanish politics, which is the fact that sociologically, a majority of the Spanish population is in the center left, right? So in order for the right to win, you need to not mobilize the leftist voters. And his dealings with Vox did, in the end, mobilize the leftist voters. And that's what was somehow broke down the possibility of achieving an absolute majority on part of the two rightist parties.
Alejandro, can I ask you, why do you think Feijóo decided not to do that televised debate? I mean, surely that's where the argument is won, or in this case, lost.
Yes, well, that's something for Núñez Feijóo to answer, and he never did when he was asked. I think with hindsight, it was a miscalculation by his advisors. But at the beginning of the campaign, as Professor Vallespín was saying, he went to this face-to-face debate with Pedro Sanchez. He used this sort of Gish Gallop technique in which you sort of try to to poison the debate, and you don't allow your opponent to develop an argument. And he emerged victorious out of that. So at that point, they decided that it wasn't a good idea for him to be exposed again in a different debate, in which probably he couldn't use the same technique. So in that sense, his advisors decided it wasn't a good idea to expose him, and he didn't. Now, with hindsight, we may think, well, it wasn't great not to show up for the last debate. But during the first week of the campaign, I would imagine that Feijóo himself thought he had done enough to win the elections, and again, opinion polls were suggesting that.
Pablo, can I ask you, Vox ended up with 500,000 votes fewer than they did in 2019. They went from 52 seats down to 33. They got a lot of coverage in the media outside of Spain. Why do outside commentators always get coverage of the far right so wrong when it comes to Spanish politics?
I don't know if I would say it was necessarily wrong. I think the fear here, and it was a real fear, and it was a real calculation that could have happened, was that the Partido Popular was going to have to enter into a formal coalition with Vox in order to form the next government. And if that was going to happen, obviously Vox was going to ask for certain things, and maybe the implementation of some of its policies that are frankly bizarre and pretty outlandish. So that was a fear, right? That there was going to have a right-wing government that is going to tilt more to the far right because you need the votes from Vox to enable to form government. So I think that was a calculation, that was a fear. Now, it was a real fear, and again, the fact that it didn't happen this time doesn't mean that it's never going to happen, but it also means, I think this shows, this evidences again that when it comes down to sort of accepting a far-right policy into government, I think at least so far, the Spanish people are not willing to accept that. They're not going to accept that easily. So I think this puts the Partido Popular, the Conservative Party, in a very interesting position into what do they do next. Technically, they won the election, but realistically, and in reality, they haven't won the election because they can't form the new government. So where now for the Partido Popular? Do they change leader? Do they change strategy? How do they actually react to this electoral victory that feels more like a defeat?
Fernando, Pedro Sanchez has very good relations with separatist parties in the Basque Country and Catalonia. This has really made him a figure of hate for the far right in Spain, hasn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So particularly with the Basque separatist party Bildu, which is in part the political branch of the terrorist group ETA, right? So in that sense, because of the suffering that some of us recall from those times, to many people it was really shocking. But on the other hand, we have to consider that probably the best thing that Sanchez did during this last legislature was precisely to somehow pacify the Catalan issue on the one hand, and to enter and to make Bildu, to turn Bildu into a normal party with which one can bargain, with which one can negotiate, right? And I think, in the long run, this is going to be better for the Spanish political system because it's a way to integrate those parties that before that were somehow, on the margins of the Spanish political system. And I think that was, that was very smart on part of, he needed to do it in order to have the votes in parliament, right? But I think that was smart on part of Sanchez. And even though it cost almost a scandal, on part of the right, and particularly, and I think this is, I would like to underline this, particularly on part of the media, the rightist media in Spain, right? Because there were those that somehow started with this idea of the Sanchismo, as Sanchez as being, the devil within Spanish politics, and someone that has made a treason out of the idea of Spain and of Spanish politics and whatever, which is of course absolutely exaggerated, but in a sense, it had its costs, right? And we saw it in the local and regional elections, where the main issue was Sanchez himself, or how to fight Sanchismo, right? But as I said before, this gives him an advantage in order to be far more capable than the PP to be capable of negotiating with those parties in order to achieve the majority.
Alejandro,
right?
Can I ask you, the hardline separatist party Together for Catalonia, they've made it clear that they see this result now as a window of opportunity for secession. Just talk to us about the Catalan issue and how that played out. And is it an issue for the wider Spanish public, do you feel?
Well, certainly it is an issue, the fact that Together for Catalonia, Junts per Catalonia, at this very moment, one of the arbiters, if you want, of the current Spanish parliament. So even if the issue of independence is not such a big issue as it was, say, in 2017, 2018, the issue has not gone away. But the paradox, if you want, is that this right-wing pro-independence party, who is in number of votes the fifth party of Catalonia, they do have the key to, for a government in Spain. So it's somehow paradoxical that they have lost a lot of power. This is a party who is the successor of Convergencia Democrática de Catalunya, which was sort of the main party of Catalonia for over 30 years. And now you're not as powerful, but certainly they've gained a lot of power precisely because they hold the key to the Spanish government, or to the possibility of Pedro Sanchez forming a government. So we are in many respects in this somehow paradoxical situation in which maybe the issue of independence is not such an important issue in daily Spanish politics, but the party who is promoting this independence of Catalonia, or one of the parties who is promoting the independence of Catalonia, they do hold a lot of power.
Pablo, talk to me about the Spanish economy. So inflation running at just 2%, which is 4 times less than the United Kingdom, for example. Unemployment at its lowest since 2008. I mean, all of this helped Sanchez, didn't it?
You would think so. And you would think that's one of the main reasons why he managed to avoid outright defeat. But I think one thing that the Partido Popular were quite successful at doing was to make the election about something else. And it was this idea that Spain was going through a bad way, in a bad pathway, and it was communism in disguise, and gender politics, and gender ideology, and all these things that, at the end of the day, I think that a lot of people in Spain do not care quite as much as my next paycheck, right? Unemployment, right? Social benefits, all these sort of things that, at the end of the day, won the argument. I think the problem with Sanchez was that I don't think he managed to do the election about what he wanted the election to be about, which was particularly these issues, the economic issues, economic performance, the recovery after the pandemic, which I think were the strong points for Pedro Sanchez. And the election became in a big way about personalities, about ideology, about defeating the far right, about fascism, about all these different stories that, yes, they mobilize people in the short term perhaps, but they don't really allow you to showcase your good work. And I think in the case of Sanchez, the better work was done in terms of the economy and the economic performance and the recovery following the pandemic and avoiding the greater negative effects of the cost of living crisis.
Fernando, back to you. What do you think happens next? What's your prediction?
Well, my prediction is that Pedro Sanchez will be the next Spanish president. So he will be capable of winning the investiture vote in Parliament, and that I would say it's 60–70% of possibilities that he's going to achieve it. And I'm almost sure that the PPs will not be capable to make it, which doesn't mean, and I think this is important also to consider, which doesn't mean that new elections are not excluded.
I was just about to ask that question, Fernando. I mean, ultimately, are we heading back to another election by Christmas and ultimately the same result again?
Yeah, well, we don't know the result because I don't know. The turnout will be probably quite small, right? But I don't know. It's difficult to say because I think we Spanish citizens have suffer a kind of a political fatigue. We've been having an incredibly long political campaign, electoral campaign. First during the local and regional elections, and now with the general elections. And so to think that in 2 or 3 months we're going to have another electoral campaign. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's difficult to imagine for most of us.
Alejandro, would you go along with that Spanish people are bored now with politics, that fatigue has kicked in?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure that there is a part of the population that they may, think about elections in 3–4 months' time and be somehow tired of the actual thought, let alone going to vote. But on the other hand, because the political tension has been so high over the last years, I would say, and mainly because there is an actual possibility of the far right getting into government, that, well, at least for the center and the center left, and for anyone who is more or less liberal in Spain, that is a mobilizing factor against the possibility of the far right getting into government. So we'll see next time. In these elections, it seems that it's been the case that many people in the center left, and obviously on the left of the political spectrum, they've mobilized against Vox and against the far right. But then what is going to happen in 4 months' time, I mean, really, honestly, no one knows. But it's probably still a strong mobilizing factor for the center-left.
And Pablo, just to bring you back in, Pablo, Spain's presidency of the European Union, the world is looking at Spain right now. I mean, it's important you get this right, isn't it?
Very much so. And I think that Europe's, you can pretty much understand why they're feeling relieved at the moment. I think the prospect of having a far-right party in government whilst holding the presidency of the European Union was going to be always complicated and a difficult issue. So I think it's very important that Spain gets this right, and it's very important that I would hope, and I agree with Fernando to some extent, that the likeliest outcome is that Pedro Sanchez will be able to form a government through some form of large coalition. I don't know if that's going to be necessarily the outcome, so we have to wait and see. I still think that's the likelier outcome. But again, who knows what can happen in 3 months, right? Who knows what's going to happen with the PP, with the Partido Popular? What will be their strategy? Okay, the strategy of blaming Sanchez for everything and saying that everything is going terribly wrong in Spain is not working. Vox scares voters, and most importantly, Vox scare away any other political party that you can make a coalition with. If you enter in coalition with Vox, that's it. It's going to be the Partido Popular and Vox. Nobody else is going to go in coalition.
Final question to you, Pablo. The gambler, he took a chance and it's paid off for him.
Exactly. So as I said before, I don't know if it's a gambler or if it's canny political strategy. And until he gets it wrong, I think we'll have to go with the latter, that he's a very good political strategist and it keeps paying off for him.
Pablo, Alejandro and Fernando, thank you so much for your input on Roundtable. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our very own YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable, TRT World. But for now, from me and all of our team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.